Hi everyone, Crista Cowan here with another episode of The Barefoot Genealogist. Today we are talking about those black sheep in your family tree. We all have them. Some of them are our ancestors. Some of them are just related to us collaterally, uncles, cousins, however many generations back. But one of the things that we love about black sheep, even if we don't love what they've done, is that they tend to create a lot of records. You end up with court records and newspaper articles and prison files and all sorts of extra documentation about their life because of their circumstances. And so today we are going to talk about what records are available online at Ancestry.com to help you trace those convict ancestors. And some of you may come across people in your family tree that you didn't expect to maybe have a record that do. And so we'll talk briefly about how to, at the end, about how to handle that. Maybe just a couple of little ethical considerations for you as you document your family stories. So with that introduction, let's go ahead and dive into today's presentation, Convicts and Criminals in Your Family Tree. Let's talk first about what records exist online and how to find them. If you've been with me before, you know I am a huge fan of the card catalog on Ancestry.com. You're going to find that by hovering over your search button and going all the way down here to the bottom to card catalog and clicking on that. Now, once you get to the card catalog, it's going to show you a list of all of the databases that exist on Ancestry.com. Here are the filters we're going to use today to see what records exist online for this topic. There is a category on the left-hand side, and the full name of the category is Tax, Criminal, Land, and Wills. So we kind of took this bucket of stuff and put it all into one location. Once you click on that, and I'll show you that here in a minute, you're going to have an additional filter, which is going to be court, governmental, and criminal records. So criminal records are what we're going to focus on today, but don't be confused by the fact that you may see other court or government type records in that collection or in that list of records. So here's what we're going to do. Over here in the card catalog, on the left-hand side of the page, you're going to see that tax, criminal, land, and wills filter. I'm just going to click on that. And now you can see that I've only got 1,122 databases showing, down from 31,000. Then I'm going to click over here on court, governmental, and criminal records, and that's going to narrow it down even further to 635 databases. So 635 databases on Ancestry.com at the moment that fit into this court, governmental, and criminal records collection. Now, I can then filter further by location, which I would encourage you to do, but let's just look at this list for a moment. You're going to see things on here like England and Wales criminal registers from 1791 to 1892. There's 1.5 million records in that collection. It's fairly large, fairly detailed, and I've actually found one of my ancestors in that particular collection. That is an excellent collection. You're going to see again here, not all of them are going to be criminal records because it's a broad category. So I can just skim down this list to see I've got some Australian convict musters, some Australian convict transportation registers, so just different types of records. I always encourage you just to look at the list before you further filter because it helps you become more familiar with what types of records exist and are available online. I'm going to filter further here by the United States so that we can get through some of this a little bit quicker here. You're going to see here, this is Fort Smith, Arkansas criminal case files from 1866 to 1900. That's a collection of about 45,000 records. So if your ancestors lived in that area, that's good to keep in mind. Now, one of the reasons I point this out is because it used to be that in the West, which Arkansas was considered at one point, in the West, that the forts or the military installations served as a form of both court and jail. And so keep in mind that the further back in time you go, the different jurisdictions may have changed, or the way that the law was enforced and punishment was handed out may have changed. So you're going to see things like Fort Smith, Arkansas. You might also see military connections to military things. You're going to see things here, the Alabama convict records, and we're going to actually look at that for just a minute. The Alabama convict records are an interesting collection. So I can come in here and let's pull this up. I'm going to go here to Beck Lawrence. And let me just show you what type of information is available. So this is a woman. She was named Becky Clark. She goes by Beck Lawrence or Becky Lawrence. She was born in about 1865, so she was 33 when she was sentenced in 1898 from Covington County, and then it tells you where these records came from. In this case, they came from the Alabama State Archives, and they are a series of convict records. Now you'll notice here there is an actual original image, and always if there is an original image, click through to that, because very often there is going to be more information on the image than what was available just in the index. The purpose of the index is just to get you to the record. It's not just to give you the information. And so here what we're going to see on this particular record is we're going to see where she was born. We're going to see a height and a weight. We're going to see information about what she looked like, her occupation, her marital status, information about her children. In this case, she has 5 children who, while she is incarcerated, are living with their grandmother. Information about other relatives. Very often the court wants to know about those other relatives, so in case something happens, they know who to contact. And so they've collected information that she has a mother, 1 brother, and 1 sister in Covington. That's going to be excellent genealogical information, not just about Becky, but about the family. There's going to be some additional information here about marks and scars, and then that's the description. Here in the center section is the court history, so the information about what she did that caused her to be incarcerated. In this case, she was incarcerated or convicted for felonious adultery, and she was sentenced to a term of 2.5 years. So then it will list the length of her sentence, both the minimum and the maximum length of time she could serve. And then over here is the prison history. In this case, there's not a lot, just her date of discharge, which was the same date as the short time of sentence. But there could be information, and I have seen it, about if they died, when and where they died, if they escaped, if they had any conflicts or bad conduct is what it's called in prison, any of that information. If they were paroled instead of released freely, then there would be information here about their parole officer and where they went after that. So always look at the image, because it very well could give you a lot more information about this person, not just about their crime, but in the case of these Alabama convict records, it gives you an idea of their family structure as well as a personal description of them as well. So love the Alabama convict records just because they're so detailed and they have this image. Now, back in the card catalog, there's another way you can search the card catalog. So I talked about using these filters. Another thing you can do is just in this title field, try typing in some words. So for example, I could type in the word prison, and up pops, prison employee ledgers and prison diary from a man who served in the Civil War, right? So just different information that way. I can also type in the word prisoner and get a different set of records. In this case, I'm going to see things like federal penitentiary records for Alcatraz and for Atlanta, Georgia. So let's go ahead and look at those Alcatraz records for just a minute here. I'm going to look for Raymond Stanley Johnson. Raymond Stanley Johnson comes up here. He was born in 1900. He died in 1977. and he was received at Alcatraz in January of 1940. In this case, you'll notice there is no original image attached, which means that information was not provided to Ancestry.com by whomever holds these records. So in this case, it's the National Archives. We don't have images. So you'll see there's maybe a little bit more information indexed here. In this case, the reason for his incarceration was the armed assault of a male custodian, which is a federal offense, and so he was placed in a federal prison. You're going to see some numbers and letters here. This is the information that you can use to then order the case file or the prison file to get more information. So anytime you find a record that's just a record or an index with no image, I encourage you to just scroll down past that record, and you're going to see here, let me make this a little bigger for you, you're going to see here where Ancestry.com received this information. So in this case, we received it from the National Archives and Records Administration, NARA, here in the United States. It comes from their collection of the records of the Bureau of Prisons. It gives a record group and information about those records. So that will tell you, always look at the source information, because very often what you're going to want to do is order a copy of that original record. In this case, you can go to the National Archives website, which is just archives.gov. In this search box here, I could type in Bureau of Prisons, and it would bring me to a page that explains the information that I can get from the National Archives about the records for the Bureau of Prisons. So strongly encourage you to do that when there is no image available, because again, as you saw in those Alabama state records, very often there's going to be additional information, not just about the prisoner and what they did, but information about the family as well. So, let's look at a couple of other things really quickly here. Whenever you find a record for a prisoner in particular, very rarely is it going to be their first offense, sadly. Oftentimes, people who lead criminal lifestyles are repeat offenders. And so don't just stop with, if you find somebody in some kind of prison or convict records, look for other records. In this case, Raymond Stanley Johnson also is included in the McNeil Island federal penitentiary records, and in this case there are images included. So he was received at McNeil Island in 1937, so 3 years before he was sent to Alcatraz. And then once you do that, then you can, if you check to see if there are other records here. But in this case, what I would do is I would go looking for newspaper articles around the time of his conviction or his sentencing to see if I can find information out about the court case or the crime itself as it was committed. Just work my way back through those newspapers. So always look for additional records on those convicts, because very, very often you're going to find that they have, this isn't their first offense. Now, that was the card catalog, and that's how you find databases that exist that you can just search, just a regular search. So in this example, I'm just going to search for this man. His name's Lemuel, but he went by Lem. I do an exact search on his name with a wild card, because I don't know how he's going to be listed. And I come up with 332 search results. Now, I can look at it by record, right? And hopefully you've played with this record category toggle. I can look for it by record and then filter by category, or I can go straight to this categories tab, because really what I'm specifically interested in are those tax, criminal, land, and will records. And I can just look at what databases come up. And here in this case, I have a record from the Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary. He was incarcerated in 1899. Now, what you're going to notice about these Leavenworth records is that they are even more scarce. The index that was provided to us, all it provides is a name, an incarceration date, and an inmate number. So again, this is just an index or a clue to where to go to get original records, or to start digging into newspapers around that time period in order to figure out what happened. In the case of Lem Shipman, he actually was incarcerated because of larceny in the Indian nation. He had a long-standing history for actually a couple of decades. This was one of his final incarcerations for a couple of decades for harassment of Native Americans, and he was prosecuted for that on many occasions. And so you have to dig in a little bit more once you find a record like this to figure out what happened or what they did. Now, where else can you find information online? So we've talked about looking in the card catalog and just narrowing down to that category. We've also talked about just doing a general name search and then looking at that particular category to see what records exist. You can also find records in newspapers, and I've mentioned that. Newspapers are a little bit trickier to search. And so one of the things that I'm going to encourage you to do is to focus on locality when you search newspapers, and also to narrow down your search results using keywords. So again, let me just show you what that might look like. If I'm doing a search, I can do a search on a name, and you can mark it exact or not. That's kind of up to you. One of the things that I've discovered is that I'll start with an exact search, and then if I don't find anything, then I will move to a default or a Soundex search on a name. And the reason is this: newspapers are not manually indexed by a human being. They're mechanically indexed by a computer. And so depending on the clarity of that image of that newspaper, sometimes the quality of that index is excellent and sometimes it's not so excellent. And so sometimes you have to search several different ways to find the information you're looking for. So in this case, all I'm going to search on is a last name. It's a fairly rare last name, and so I only get 19,000 search results. Now remember, I'm looking specifically for newspapers, and so I'm going to narrow down to that category. I still have 2,191 results, and as you can see from this list, they're from newspaper titles all over the country. So keeping in mind our little tip about focusing on locality, now I'm going to come back in here, and you're going to notice I have some different search information. In this case, one of the fields I have available is publication information, and I'm going to put in a locality. I want to see only newspapers, I'm going to restrict that to exact, only newspapers that were published in the state of California. So now when I click search, I'm down to 179 results, and I can skim through this list of titles to see if one of them is of interest to me. In this case, I'm going to click on this Long Beach, California title, and then I can skim through these headlines to see if one of them has information that I am interested in. So again, what we're going to do is, let me just run through that again. You're going to do a name search of some sort. Once you get to the newspaper category, you can add in a publication location and then do your search that way. You can also narrow it by keyword if you need to put in the name of a town, or if you know what type of a crime they committed or what court they were if you know something about it, like what prison they were sentenced to or whatever, you can put in a keyword or two to help narrow some of your search results. But you can see, even just with a name and a state, I don't have very many search results here. This is a doable list of things to go through. In this case, if I'm looking for my Uncle Don, he comes up here in the Long Beach Press-Telegram on the 12th of January 1965, not because he committed a crime, but because he was the victim of a crime. This was about a shooting in a casino. Now, so pay attention to that as well. Of course, then that raises the question about what he was doing in the casino, and I have talked to him about that, but it'll give you, in this case, two entire articles, one here and one here, two whole articles about this particular incident that caused my great uncle to be shot. So newspapers are a really excellent resource, and I would just encourage you to spend some time with them, getting to know them a little bit better. let's just talk in our last few minutes here about a couple more things. First are what offline resources you should consider. So I mentioned the National Archives is one for federal prisons or federal court cases. They have the records available there. Not all of those records are public, which means they're not going to be put online, but you can access them. Their website is archives.gov. That provides you with a catalog to the records that they have available. You then, of course, have to go to a National Archives location to access those records. You can also access records through county courthouses. So one of the things that I do when I'm looking for records for a location is I will just type in the name of the county, in this case, Monroe County, Indiana. And when I got to their website, they have a tab here for the justice system there. And then there is contact information for that court. Okay. Now, keep in mind that genealogy is not the primary or even the secondary focus of a county courthouse. They may hold records. They may have transferred their historical records to a local or a state archive or a state historical society. They may not have time to deal with your request. So just recognize that you need to be patient and you need to be kind. And remember that genealogy is not the purpose for the existence of the county courthouse, but they do have records or know where those records have been sent for the historical court cases in their jurisdiction. And so that very often you're going to find phone or mailing, or in some cases even email information where you can just send them a quick message and say, I'm looking for historical court cases for Monroe County, Indiana from 1893. Can you tell me where to find those records? And then they can let you know where those records are housed. So county courthouses for local court cases, local crimes are going to be your best bet. And again, most of those records are not going to be online just because they're scattered all over the country in those county courthouses. Also, local newspapers. So we do have a lot of newspapers available on Ancestry.com. There's also a very, very large collection of newspapers available on newspapers.com. However, some local newspapers, which may have more information about local crime or a local court case or local sentencing, those local papers may have more information than a large regional or state newspaper. And so the best way to find out about what local newspapers existed at the time that the crime may have been committed are going to be libraries. So local libraries. So again, I just went and Googled Monroe County, Indiana library. It brought me to the Monroe County Public Library website. Under their research tab here, they have a whole category for genealogy. And I could read through that to see what information is available or who I could contact to see what records they have in their library. Very often what you're going to discover is that the local newspapers are available on microfilm in that local library. Sometimes you may have a librarian who is willing to do some of that research for you for just the cost of the copies of the records. Sometimes you are going to have to go put it on your travel list and visit there in person or contact a cousin or family member who might still live in that area. Okay, last thing in our last couple of minutes that I want to talk about is just some ethical considerations as you are documenting the family story, as you come across these records. These are the two questions that I ask myself when it comes to how much information I include in my public family tree. The first question is this person still living? And the next one is, are the children of this person still living? So even if the person is no longer living, if the children of this person are still living, I'm going to pause and make some decisions. Here are the decisions that I feel like I have to make when deciding whether or not to include links to the newspaper articles or the court cases or the incarceration records of some of these people. One is, could this information hurt or embarrass them or their family? And then the other one is, if I'm not sure, can I ask? So, in the case of my Uncle Don, who was caught in the crossfire of a shooting in a casino, I had questions about that event, what he was doing there. I knew that he had had a problem with gambling. I knew that this event occurred in the wee small hours of the morning. And so I went out to lunch with him one day, several months after I found that article, and I asked him about it. I asked him about what he'd been doing there and what the circumstances of the shooting were, and he was more than willing to share that information with me, and so I have since attached that newspaper article. I've documented what he told me in the notes in my Family Tree Maker file, and that's fantastic that I have that story, and it shows a little bit of his weakness. He talked to me about his gambling addiction and some of his poor choices that he made in life that oftentimes put him in less than favorable circumstances. He was willing to share that information. Now, I have another person in my family who, it's a cousin who was in the U.S. military, and he was abusive to his wife. And one night after he had worked 24 hours, he came home and he was beating her, and she killed him. And she was put on trial for that event. Now so he's dead. She was incarcerated, she was incarcerated for the time of the trial, and then I think she was actually acquitted of that crime on the basis of self-defense. But their children are still living, and I don't know that they want that information spread far and wide. They're third cousins, and so I'm not real close with them. I don't feel like I can ask them because I don't really know them. I just came across this story in my research. And so what I have done is in my Family Tree Maker, and you can do this also in your online tree. If I just go back here to Ancestry.com, I have included, rather than attaching records, I have included that information in my notes. So you, on any person page on your on Ancestry.com on your tree, you can actually add notes. Mine here says view note, yours may say add note. Those notes are private, which means even if your tree is public, nobody else can see those notes. Those are your private research notes. And so I have included sensitive information in that note field so that I have it documented, but so that it's not publicly available at this time. Now, there may come a time when those who are involved in the circumstances have passed away, and I can then feel like I can make that information public. So that's just a couple of things to take into consideration. If you're talking about people back in the 1800s or the 1700s, no problem. I don't see any problem with documenting those family stories and making sure that that information is available. But when you start talking about people who are, in the 1900s and in this century, you're going to need to take into consideration some of those ethical things as you start to put together that family story. Just make sure you're not going to hurt or embarrass anyone in the process. Hopefully that was useful information about where to find records online, where to find records offline, and maybe a couple of things to consider as you tell that family story. If you have suggestions for topics for future broadcasts, I would encourage you to email me at ask@ancestry.com with those suggestions. I am in the process of putting together the June calendar of events that will be available on our Facebook events page sometime in the next week or so. So if you've got topic suggestions, go ahead and get those emailed in the next day or two so that we can put that calendar together and make sure that we're talking about the things that you want to be talking about. Until next time, this is Crista Cowan. Have fun climbing your family tree.